guys getting some cool air back there?
Yep.
We use our grills.
All right, dinner's almost ready.
And yet we definitely always use our common sense.
Trying to make a program that would have common sense.
Common sense isn't so common.
No, it just makes so much sense.
So right now, join lifelong Houstonian Bill King as we take on the issues with a little bit of Houston common sense.
Common sense.
It's time for Common Sense.
This is Common Sense with Bill King. Here's Bill.
Hey, everybody. Welcome on a rainy Saturday afternoon. Got a very exciting show today. We've got Congressman Dan Crenshaw in the studio with us. As you know, Dan was a long shot to win this seat back when he started out, but got there and has gotten a lot of attention, really one of the rising stars in the Republican Party and in Congress. Dan, you got a new book out called Fortitude, American Resilience in an Age of Outrage. And I looked up this morning, saw it's number 15 on the top in the New York Times bestsellers. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's been on for since it came out, April 7th. Oh, so haven't been kicked off yet. That's great. Hey, I wanted to start out with talking about your personal life a little bit and some of the things I found interesting in the book. You've dealt with a lot of adversity at a relatively young age in your life. Of course, your injuries that you sustained in Afghanistan. But I also didn't realize, I knew you'd lost your mother, but I didn't know you'd lost her to cancer when you were 10 years old. Mm-hmm. So you had a lot to deal with, and you have some thoughts about that in your book. And I just wonder if you could share those with the public about when people are confronted with adversity, which a lot of people are today, how do you deal with that? Yeah. I mean, and thanks for having me on, first of all, and great to be with you, Bill. It's always good to see you. The book is not people probably think it's a typical political autobiography or another SEAL book, and it's really not. It's a philosophical, I think, exploration of mental toughness, and I try to bring about principles that will help you be more mentally tough and also help our culture be more mentally tough. This book was written in response to the kind of petty outrage and victimhood culture that we see all around us. And it was written before the coronavirus era and everything we're seeing now, but the lessons I think are applicable. And the became more relevant as events developed. Yeah. And the chapter I talk about my mother, it's in the beginning of the book, because that chapter is called Perspectives from Darkness. And I mean darkness quite literally, because I was blinded for a while when I was hit by an IED blast in 2012, and I didn't recover for quite a while. Lost my right eye, and there was very little chance of me ever seeing out of my left eye again. And I bring up my mother because I'm sitting in this hospital bed suffering pretty badly, and in order to get past certain things, you have to have a sense of perspective, and you have to live with some truths, and they're tough love truths, but they go something like this. Somebody else has had it harder than you, and they dealt with it better. So that's always true. I don't care what your situation is. That's always true. And even if you don't believe it's true, believe it, because it stiffens your spine a little bit. If somebody else got through this, I can too. And all I had to do was think about a young mother who was trying to raise two kids, dying of cancer. And she eventually lost that battle, but I never saw her complain. I never saw her engage in self-pity or take it out on us, her two sons. And that matters. That's a hero to look up to. You've probably dealt with things harder than what you're dealing with now. And if you haven't, somebody else has dealt with it. And you can look up to those people. You can look up to their stories, and you can live out that story yourself. Yeah, my mom had a saying. I'm sure it wasn't original, but I learned it from her. She said, life is 10% of what happens to you and 90% how you react to it. 100%. And I thought about that while I was reading those passages out of your book. Right. And that I don't think you said you hadn't finished it yet. I know you're on your way. But when you do, you'll get to the second to last chapter, which is called The Stories We Tell Ourselves. And so that's exactly what we're talking about. It's exactly what you just said. Whether you've been truly victimized or hurt or not. Again, this is the book is largely about outrage culture, which is more of a perceived injustice as opposed to a real one. But there are real injustices, but your reaction to those doesn't change. It shouldn't change. There's benefit in telling yourself a proper story of overcoming it. And when I use certain phrases to explain that, like I get two phrases or I have to. Do I have to wear an eye patch? Do I have to be blind out of one eye, or do I get to be? Mm-hmm. Now, at first, that seems kind of like a weird sense of self-deception, but it's not. It's the story you tell yourself. It's living with that silver lining, or looking for the best the best of your situation and telling yourself a story about being a victor and not a victim. You cannot change what happened, but you certainly control the future. And we have to remind people of that.
Yeah. I have a daughter who was born without her right arm. And so she has very much the same attitude you have. And she's actually started her own YouTube channel called One Arm Wonder,
awesome.
Where she talks about how you do things only with one arm. And it's actually, and I think it is so true how you deal with things. Let me turn to a second about your decision to run for Congress. You retired from the military. You went up and did some work at Harvard at the Kennedy School. You worked in Congress. And then at some point in time, you decided to run for Congress. Nobody knew who Dan Crenshaw was. Nobody thought you had a chance. There was all sorts of people in that race with all kinds of money. Mm-hmm. What went through your mind to decide to run, and why did you think that you could do it?
Well, I kind of live with this sort of no plan B mentality. That's another chapter in the book. And it effectively means when you decide to commit to something, you better commit. You don't give yourself a choice about it. It doesn't mean don't have a plan B. It's not like I thought, well, if I lose this election, and I should probably have some kind of plan, and I did. But that I was about to take a job at the Department of Defense, and I just left the military, just got my graduate degree. I was looking at policy work. I was still interested in government service, wasn't sure what that looked like. And then Ted Poe announced retirement, and I came home, and the next day was running for Congress. I threw my entire.
Why did you think that running for Congress was the right path for you?
Well, so this is the advice I give people. There's a difference between going into policy and politics. If you're interested in policy, being behind the scenes, maybe focusing on one singular aspect of policy, go into that. Politics, you have the ability to make an impact on a wide variety of policies. And so I'd always thought about it in the back of my mind, but I never had a pathway into it. Not rich, don't know anybody who's rich, and didn't have a window of opportunity. But all of a sudden I did have a window of opportunity, and you jump through it. And if you do jump through it, be fully committed. I mean, that's what it means to live with no plan B.
Oh, that's great. Well, we're going to take a quick break now for just a couple of minutes. We'll be back with more Dan Crenshaw on Common Sense Talk Radio. Hey, everybody, this is Bill King back with more Common Sense Talk Radio. Welcome to everybody listening out there on KPRC AM 950. And also welcome to all the Facebook people. I know we've got several hundred out there, it looks like. If you guys would share this with all of your contacts, maybe we'll get some more people watching and hear what Dan has to say. Dan, I want to talk to you about COVID. It seems like it's the only conversation anybody's having these days. And I know you have some interesting thoughts on this. I think, just tell us sort of generally where you think we are right now. What's your view of how we've reacted to this, and where do we go from here?
I've been pretty vocal about this. We overreacted immensely. And some of that was understandable. There was a lot of facts we didn't know. There were a lot of properties of the disease we didn't quite understand back in March. How it spreads, how deadly it really was. As those facts started to come out, and so maybe some more rational thinking should have been implemented, we should have ended lockdowns, I think, earlier than we did. And knowing full well that people have the freedom to take the risk that they feel is acceptable to them. There's this strange jump that we did to the costliest possible option, which was universal lockdowns. And I distinguish a universal lockdown from, say, canceling large events, right? That would be more of a vertical lockdown. So there's a lot of steps that you can take between doing nothing and the universal shelter in place that we basically did almost as a country. To different extents, mildly, but for the most part, even here in Houston, even though it was a safer at home order, we were all basically sheltered in place. That was true all along. Had huge costs to the economy, huge costs. Shutting down schools had huge costs that probably way outweighed the benefits. And it's frustrating because we always knew, for instance, that young kids were barely at risk, if at any risk at all. They're more at risk from the flu. Okay, and now, what are the risks of doing homeschooling for every single kid? Well, pretty huge. I mean, it hurts the parents and their ability to work. Child abuse has gone up radically. Like I heard over 30% more ER visits. And that's just ER visits, because why do you take a kid to the ER? Because you think you might have really hurt them.
Right.
So that doesn't even take into account all of the other potential harm. Actual work in schools has gone down by huge numbers. So huge costs that just never get spoken about.
And a lot of public health costs. I mean, I understand that childhood immunizations are way down.
Right.
I saw one oncologist say he thought there were at least 70,000 cancers that were going to go undiagnosed because people weren't coming in for their checkups. I mean, we talked about this while we were off the air. I mean, there has just been no consideration of what all those collateral cost and collateral damage is from the lockdown. We've been focused entirely on whether somebody's going to get this virus or not, and nothing else.
Well, we've talked to the hospitals here in Houston, so yes, hospitalizations are up, and people are trying to claim that means that we unlocked too early.
Yeah.
Well, you have to actually look at what's happening here. The people going to hospitals are those with pre-existing conditions like diabetes, so they're going in having renal failure. Now, they also happen to have COVID, okay? But their lungs aren't the thing. That's not the thing that's deteriorating. They're not in a hospital bed because of that. They're in a hospital bed partly, maybe COVID obviously makes things worse, but COVID illness has a very specific outcome, and it's inflammation in the lungs, makes you harder to breathe. We all know that. There's other things that happen too, but these are pre-existing conditions that were not tended to for months because we shut down hospitals to everybody else unless COVID, because we overreacted so intensely. And for what? Originally we had a goal, and it was a decent goal. We want to make sure our hospital system doesn't become totally overwhelmed. Here in Houston, we even built a new, a hospital basically, and then we tore it down because we built it as we told people don't do anything. Right? That was the wrong time to build it. The right time to build it is when we're telling people to actually, hey, go out.
Yeah.
Go out a little bit more, and then the goalpost got moved to this strange notion of just stopping the spread at all, and that was never going to happen. You can only delay it. So that it's not about waves. It's about a managed spread of a disease that doesn't have a vaccine, and giving people the ability to risk manage that disease on their own terms.
Yeah, I want to go back and just really make this point again about moving the goalpost. I thought that was a great analogy you used, because initially the whole idea was we're going to flatten the curve. That was how many times did we hear we're going to flatten the curve so the hospital system's not overwhelmed, and that was more or less accomplished. I mean, especially in places like Texas where we've been relatively unaffected until the
last accomplished
last
everywhere
weeks.
Except New York City.
Yeah,
New York City was the only outlier,
and all of a sudden it went from that to we ought to be not having any cases at all, which how do you do that with a respiratory virus? I don't know how that's possible when you don't have a vaccine.
No, it's silly. And policymakers just showed a complete inability to engage in basic critical thinking. I mean, I think in hindsight, it's just absolutely deplorable what happened. I mean, comparing there was I remember our county judge talking about Houston, like looking at New York City and saying, this is what's next for Houston. We have to be prepared. And I'm like, on what planet do you think that New York City is anything like Houston? As far as the things that matter, at least the population density, international travel, like it
subways,
right? Yeah. And luckily, we didn't have a governor who told COVID-19 infected patients to go back into their nursing homes like Andrew Cuomo did in New York. There's reasons New York was like that, and it takes some basic critical thinking skills to understand why that is, and then make rational policy decisions as a result. We just again, Texas didn't overreact nearly as bad as many other states, thankfully, and that's because of our governor, whose main data point he was looking at was hospitalizations, and then a basic understanding that this is a risk we have to live with, and it is up to individuals interacting properly with each other, or choosing not to and assuming that risk.
Yeah, it's funny. I was back early on in this. I put something on Facebook about it. I said, look, there are all sorts of other risks that we face every day. Probably the most dangerous thing we do is get in a car and drive someplace. And, there'll be 40, 50,000 people die from that in the United States. Yeah. Why is it that we have this focus on this and not anything else that kills us, like heart disease or smoking or all those? And I was just pummeled on Facebook. How can you don't care about my grandmother? You're going to kill my grandmother. This is this sort of
it's so strange because your grandmother has the choice to stay at home and stay away from people. It's such a strange. Like if I want to open up a restaurant, am I telling you have to go eat at that restaurant?
Yeah,
it's so ridiculous.
And I had one guy say, you don't understand. I drive my car. I can control my car. Well, no, you can't control a drunk driver, T-boning you or something. I mean, there's and for some reason, I don't really understand the psychology behind this, but I guess
it's
because
the risk of the unknown.
It's
that's
a new
what it is.
risk,
it's
and people
new.
are just
And you look around Houston right now. people know it now and they're over it. I mean, that's I don't. That seems pretty obvious to me. And so, and again, I give everybody a little bit of grace at the beginning because there was a lot of unknown. But but there is no rational explanation for any more hysteria and any more calls for lockdowns at this point because people understand it. And if they're truly scared, again, no one's forcing you to do anything. I don't know how Americans so quickly gave up their liberties and their ability to maintain their own safety. That's a deeply held American liberal principle, and we can't just throw it out the wayside because some people are mad at you.
I was telling you the break, I just got back from a trip to South Texas, and it's really interesting. Once you get outside of the bubble of the metropolitan areas, I mean, life is kind of going on as normal. People are not wearing masks. They're not social distancing. I mean, they're just out there doing their activity. On a drive from here to the valley, if you stop along the way in these small towns, you would never know this is going on, which I thought was quite fascinating. You hear a lot of comparisons of how the United States has done to the rest of the world. I know you got some thoughts about that. Can you tell us, is it fair to compare us to how other countries have done, and why or why not?
Yeah, I mean, it's always – you can always try. It's usually an apples to oranges comparison. Overall, we've done well. Again, if you exclude New York City, our death rates are very low. Texas death rates are probably, I think, some of the lowest in the country. So rate, obviously death rate meaning the
fatalities per 100,000
right. and also, per infection as well. And so we do pretty well. Our hospital system was far better prepared than anybody else's. And so this goes against all these people wanting socialized medicine. If you want socialized medicine, that means one thing. All right. Yeah, you can put on paper that you have a right to care, but you might have to wait months for it. Why? Because you just constricted the supply of healthcare in your country. And we see that in Canada. We saw that in Britain. We had way more ventilators available. Even before we started manufacturing them like crazy, we had way more ICU beds. Way more ICU beds. We have an abundance of supply. We have the best healthcare in the world. We pay a lot for it, and that's the thing everybody complains about. We've got to fix that. But we pay for the best healthcare and the most accessibility to healthcare. You don't have to wait 6 months to get an MRI in this country. So that and all the cutting edge research on COVID-19 is of course being pioneered here as well. And so there's a lot of stories to tell there. As far as strategies, you can look at Sweden. They didn't do what everybody else did. Again, is it a perfect apples and apples comparison? No, they're a healthier population. They can maybe afford to take on a bit of risk, but I think they understood the more rational decision making early on. I know you had questions about South Korea.
Yeah, so I noticed I was reading your bio today, and I saw you'd spent a tour in South Korea, and I'm just curious. They had very little impact from the disease. What are your thoughts about why it's so different there from here?
Yeah, trying to tease that out. Well, first, I've talked to some doctors about this. They've long had higher immunity to SARS viruses because they've been dealing with them for a long time. Coronaviruses are generally originate in Asia, and so they're more used to it. Their immune systems are more accustomed to it. That has something to do with some research has shown that. Also, they had one major outbreak, and they quickly got on it. You'll get something like New York City. You're going to have a lot of hot spots that bubbled up all simultaneously, and then poor policy considerations to deal with them. Again, the vast majority of deaths are from nursing homes. Why? Because governor of New York put people back in nursing homes and has never been held accountable for that. It's still, frankly, unbelievable. So there's a lot of obvious explanations, I think. At first, everybody was screaming about testing. Listen, testing is certainly part of a strategy, but it doesn't prevent any spread, okay? And once the disease is already out there, contact tracing is kind of a lost cause. So there's a lot of things people have to consider before screaming words.
Okay, we got to take a quick break here. We're going to come back and talk a little foreign policy with Dan right after these commercial messages. This is Bill King, Common Sense Talk Radio, KPRC AM 950. Hey everybody, Bill King back with more Common Sense Talk Radio. Our guest today is Congressman Dan Crenshaw. Dan, I want to turn and focus to foreign policy, which is something I know you pay a lot of attention to. And I want to start with the war in Afghanistan and Iraq, because obviously you know that very personally. And I guess the question I've got to start out with, we've been there almost 20 years now, is the treasure blood, the price we paid, have we gotten value for that or not? You are right there. You've paid the price. So tell us what you think about that.
I think people have been highly misinformed about what the original purpose of being there in the first place is. We've been in South Korea a lot longer. We've been in Japan a lot longer. We've been in Germany a lot longer too. Why are we there? Well, we build partnerships with those countries. Those are alliances that we hold dear. We're there for deterrence. We're there kind of as an insurance policy. This isn't that different in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I don't know why the public has been sold this really strange narrative, and it's both liberal and conservative. It's really strange. Strikes me as very odd. What have we gotten out of it? No more 9/11s. That's what we've gotten out of it. If we leave, if we just let everybody run free out there, well, okay, fine. It's back to the 90s, and then we can hope that we don't get another 9/11. But there's not guys like me out there hunting bad guys and making sure we take the fight to them. Just because we decide that the war is over for us doesn't mean that Al-Qaeda and the Taliban and Al-Shabaab and ISIS decide that the war is over for them. And I don't know where this false narrative came from. It's always struck me as very odd.
I guess it's interesting because I don't think maybe one of the reasons is because there was no political leader that ever had the guts to stand up and say we're basically going to be there forever.
Yeah, that is a problem.
Everybody always talked about we're going to get out. I mean, you always heard about wind downs and all of that. So your view is we're going to be there basically indefinitely. Is that what you think?
If there's a threat out there, that's why you train people like me to go into a platoon and go over there and work with our Iraqi partners and our Afghani partners and go do it. We're not victims. Stop saying bring the troops home as if that's some kind of like moral argument. I'm so sick of it. I'm very passionate about this, clearly. And you are correct. The reason people think that is because politicians kept telling them that there's that at a certain point we're going to have some treaty signed. That was always ridiculous. That was never what was going to happen. Now, if you want to argue against nation building, I think that's a more valid argument. As far as the blood and treasure argument goes, it's, again, that makes more sense. But as far as a force that I think needs to be constantly engaged, keep some eyes and ears on the ground, work with our partner forces and strategically counter terrorists there, then you have to be in favor of that. And the same people who want to bring all the troops home were cheering when we got al-Baghdadi, cheering when we got Soleimani. You can't have it both ways. If you like those operations, you have to have a footprint there. Okay. Otherwise, you will let terrorists roam free, and eventually, what do they think about every day when they wake up? They think about attacking the United States of America and Europe. That's what they want to do.
What is your assessment? Do you think the situation's better off than it was 20 years, or I hate to say are we winning because that's so simplistic, but do you think that the area is being pacified or not? Are we making any headway?
No, I mean, it's again, it is the wrong question. Well, it's better because we have no more 9/11s. I mean, that really is the entire point. And again, you can argue about what is the minimal footprint we need to engage that one mission. That's a reasonable conversation to have. Can we keep bringing back troops? And we have. And we went from hundreds of thousands to a few thousand. And it seems strange to me that we're arguing over a very economical force of a few thousand just to maintain some semblance of counterterror capability. And so, I mean, it depends on what country you're talking about also. If you look at Kabul, if you look at Kandahar city, yeah, you've made a lot of progress there. I mean, but it's very different talking about the rural regions of Afghanistan. Talking about Iraq, we made a ton of progress, and then we made a mistake of pulling out too early. I mean, the nation building actually did kind of work in Iraq. Okay, we largely maintained law and order and peace and put it on a path to some semblance of prosperity, and then we left. And so, we do have this problem with constant knee-jerk policy reactions, and it's a complex discussion that would, frankly, it's much longer than just a couple of minutes on the radio show about how to maintain.
We kind of have,
there.
Especially in Afghanistan, we sort of swung the pendulum back and forth so many times. I know I've heard some people in Afghanistan talk about the fact that you never know where America is going to be because we're all in, then we're all out, we're all in and all out. So
they say that we have all the clocks, but they have all the time, and that's because they have patience and they have a long-term strategy, and we've never been able to agree on one. And so a simple one that we should be able to agree on is some kind of minimal force, keeps the alliances alive, keeps training Afghans to do the job themselves, and keeps a pulse on counterterrorism capabilities. I mean, it shouldn't be much more complicated than that. America has no appetite for nation building, and I think that's fine and reasonable. But to say that we should just have zero footprint anywhere is a very deeply silly thing to say.
Yeah. I'm curious what your thoughts are about Central America, because in many ways, You have equally bad people in Central America, not motivated by exactly the same motivations, but doing tremendous damage to this country by exporting and pushing people and the coyotes and drugs and all that. Should we be doing something in Central America like we did in the Middle East? I mean, it's so much closer. It seems like it affects us so much more directly on a daily basis. And yet we seem to sort of ignore what's going on and say we're going to build a wall, which, whether you agree with that or not, that's ultimately, if you don't get to the source of the problem. Should we be paying more attention to what's going on in Central America, thinking about some way we can affect things there?
Well, it wouldn't look anything like the Middle East because it's too much of an apple-oranges comparison. There's not necessarily an insurgency in Central America. It's more of a law and order and corruption problem. And so a Plan Colombia, much like the Merida initiative in Mexico, is a lot closer to what we're looking at. And we were very successful with that in Colombia. The Merida initiative has been less successful. The drug cartels are extremely powerful. And the Mexican government has to be fully invested. The Colombian government was fully invested. It took a lot of blood and sweat and tears to get that done. Mexican government has to be our partner on that. Central American governments have to be our partner on that. It's not like we can just decide, hey, let's send some SEAL platoons in there and destroy the MS-13 gangs. It doesn't work that way. It's a sovereign country. But to your point, our foreign policy should certainly take a much stronger look at Central America and South America. It's our hemisphere. It's a more culturally consistent part of the world with the United States, and we have to care about it. And like their prosperity affects our prosperity. So I mean, I fully agree. It's just it's not an either or. It's not Middle East or this. It's this and this.
Mm-hmm. Let's turn to China for a little bit. Mm-hmm. China's become such a huge issue, and there's a lot of China bashing going on these days. Mm-hmm. It seems to me that we've got to figure out some way to deal with China. They're not going to go away. What's your view of how do we engage with China, but at the same time try to contain things like intellectual property theft, those sort of? What's the right mixture of how we engage with China?
Well, we've been trying to figure that out for decades, and there was a lot of people who believed that China would grow into the world order in a responsible way, and I think there were the hope and change crowd, and it's just not true. We have to all admit that they had never had any good intentions of participating in a liberal world order the way we would have liked them to. They were always going to lie, cheat, and steal, and that's exactly what their plan is still. And so we have to live in reality and deal with that. We also have to live within the reality of some semblance of an interconnected economy that we do have. And so the answers aren't clear. But incentivizing businesses to make things here, incentivizing our people to get the skills they need, like looking at vocational training, we have to be able to outcompete them on multiple fronts, and we have to be able to assert ourselves in the Pacific to make sure that we protect world trade lines, to make sure that we're protecting our intellectual property. When we're talking about bringing supply chains back home or diversifying them, one of the ways you do that maybe most efficiently is simply making it risky to do business in China, and our Treasury Department can do that.
One of the sort of unusual effects of COVID is maybe accelerating that. We need to bring those home because people are suddenly found out that, oh, wait a minute, I can't get the Adidas or I can't get the PPE or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So I think we might see that really accelerate as a result of COVID.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of policies that you can just dust off the shelf that probably have more political backing now. And, I think that's important, whether it's competing with Chinese financing around the world, competing with their Belt and Road initiatives, making sure that we're strengthening alliances in the Pacific. There has been quite a few moves to do that, and I think political will. And it becomes a technical conversation on the economic side about how to.
Give me 20 seconds on Russia. How do we engage with Russia?
20 seconds?
Yeah.
They're not like China's a rising power, Russia's a declining power, and they lash out accordingly. They're still an adversary. They're also interesting because we also coordinate with them so closely on things like space travel. So it's a much longer conversation than 20 seconds.
Okay. All right. So we got to take a break here. We'll come back, and I want to finish up with the future of the Republican Party, which some people think Dan Crenshaw represents. We'll be right back. This is KPRC, Common Sense Talk Radio. All right, folks, we're back for the last segment with Dan Crenshaw on Common Sense Talk Radio. Dan, I want to talk about the future of the Republican Party because I'm kind of worried about it. You look at the polling and you look at where younger folks are on the issues, and they're not where the Republican Party is for the most part. And I'm talking about things like climate change, same-sex marriage, immigration, socialism versus the free market, which is something that was an argument I thought we'd gotten past. But you look at the polling today, and a very big percentage of young people are not convinced that the free market's the way to go. Mm-hmm. Now, you've done a remarkable job of reaching out to young people and telling your story and making some very principled arguments. What's the path forward for the Republican Party?
Well, we're not going to change the platform radically. It depends on which subject we're talking about, of course, but I think we've been pretty successful. I mean, I've been pretty successful in reaching young people. We had a Houston Youth Summit last year that reached 2,000 kids. I might as well say it on this show right now. We're about to announce our next one on September 13th, and so you'll see that on my social media pretty soon. It's going to be absolutely incredible. It shouldn't be that hard to sell the Republican platform. It's just that young people have not connected with the leaders selling it. I think that's part of the problem. And so we do need younger, more diverse people selling what is a pretty easy thing to sell. Okay, we want you to keep more of your money. We want you to have more freedom. We want it to be easy for you to start a business. We don't think the federal government should solve every single problem. We should think the people solving problems should be closest to the problem. That's the idea of federalism. Okay, we think that personal responsibility and a meritocracy actually matters. We believe in real equality, not swinging the pendulum around on looking for or trying to group on group identity politics. We believe in actual liberal values, which I would say the Democratic Party no longer does. We believe in free speech, even if you don't like it. These are very basic American things. We have better solutions to environmental policy than the left does. The left has no solutions. They think wind and solar are going to power the world for the next 25 years. That's complete nonsense. Energy demand will go up by 30% over the next 25 years. The left is very good at making you think that you're in a crisis and that you need a revolution in order to solve it. The Republicans stand for stability and order and freedom. The left stands for absolute chaos. And I don't think you need any more indication or proof of that than the last few weeks. I don't think you need any more proof of the idea of who stands for liberty than the last few months. The left wanted to keep you locked down, still does. And Republicans were the first to say, hey, guys, let's think a little bit more rationally about this and trust people. And
I take it you're not for defunding the police.
Yeah, you'd be right. You'd be right. And neither is any rational person. And I wish I could say that's just the fringe left, of course, and my good-hearted Democrats don't agree with that. But you know what? Most major cities have now, L.A., New York City, Minneapolis, Boston has toyed with the idea now, and they're hurting for it. Crime has skyrocketed in these cities that are run by Democrats. It's hard. And here's the other thing I would tell young people. It is Democrats that want to raise your taxes to pay more into Social Security. These entitlement programs that are making our generation go bankrupt. They want to tax you more to pay for that. The Republican plan is to actually be honest with you and say, hey, we need to have smart reforms to these policies that are driving our country into massive debt that your young generation will have to pay off. Shouldn't be hard to sell this message. Like none of it,
I was addressing a young Republican group not too long ago, and I was talking about the burden of Social Security and Medicare. I said, like, all you folks need to work really hard to take care of old folks like me.
Mm-hmm. It's a Ponzi scheme.
It is an incredible burden that we placed on our younger generation, and and I don't know the one thing that I find troubling too, though, is to be successful in this country, you've got education. When I went through school, I went to law school at University of Houston. My dad was a pipe fitter, worked my way through school, and I think I was $170 a semester for tuition or something like that. Today, these kids are coming out with boatloads of student loan debt, and you can understand how they're demoralized. It seems like to me we've got to make sure that opportunity is given. personal responsibility is great, but they've got to have an opportunity.
So there was a good article written on this, how boomers socialism led to millennial socialism. And basically, millennials have seen boomers get they voted themselves all of these new and bigger benefits year after year, expanding Social Security benefits, expanding Medicare benefits, which is these are the drivers of our debt. There is no other thing driving our debt. It's not tax cuts, as Democrats like to claim. It's like a drop in the bucket. And it's not even defense spending. It's not even all the other programs that we spend on. It's these entitlements. So I think millennials see that and they think, well, what about our stuff? Now, millennials should do, and what I advocate for is, no, we have to all be adults and actually take a holistic view at our country and the best way to govern it. Simple rules for a complex society, sustainable policies in the long run. Think about the long run. Don't just think about what works for you in the short run. That's the American way. And so millennials have seen these things, and now they want the free healthcare, they want the free housing, and they want the free education, because these are the things that have gotten more expensive for my generation.
Mm-hmm. How do you make that argument, though? I mean,
the way I just did.
Well, I understand, but when I was talking about pensions at the city of Houston, I go and say, look, here's the math. This math doesn't work. Mm-hmm. Oh, you hate firefighters, you hate police. No, I actually love those people, but I'm just saying, here's the math, and the math doesn't work anymore. It just seems like there's a lack of critical thinking, is the term you've used here today, when it comes to politics and the way people decide to vote. And even when you get in Congress, you start having these debates and these, people go to these extreme positions.
That's why you have to start with the culture. And we have a culture where we're easily bought off by false promises of politicians. And so my message to young people is, do not be bought off by false promises. It's the easiest thing in the world for me to get reelected is to be like, I'm going to do this for you. I will get you this amount of money. I'm going to make things free for you. Well, that's never been what government is. It cannot possibly be what government is. No rational person would design a government that way, but we have become this paternalistic society. And the sooner that Americans stop falling for it, the sooner we can get out of these problems. And so it's not just politicians' fault. They're responding to an incentive. Now, Republicans don't do that. It's very much against Republican principles. Democrats have no problem doing that. They have no problem promising you whatever it will take to get your vote. You want to talk about buying votes? That's what buying votes is, fundamentally.
Well, but Republicans certainly have never talked about any serious Social Security reform or
that's not true.
Medicare.
That's not true. It's very. I can do it right now. Raise the retirement age. That's what my millennial generation has to give, and means test it.
No, but look, I agree with all that. I've written about all that. But I'm just saying the Republicans haven't led that charge. The Republicans, especially in the last 10 years, have been as physically irresponsible as the Democrats have been.
Yeah, well, it's more complicated than that. But and it's not true that we haven't led. I mean, Sam Johnson, rest his soul, led that charge already. And the math is actually very simple, and it's a very easy reform. The problem is that our own voters don't want it. And this is what it goes back to the culture. We have to start acting like Americans who are in this together, not just looking out for what works for us in the next moment. We have to look at the whole thing and vote for people who are willing to take risk and say responsibly, this is how we fix it as a whole.
Yeah, one thing I keep telling the people of my generation is when you start talking about who's going to be paying your benefits, go look at your children and your grandchildren, because that's who's going to be burdened with that debt.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And again, it's our own voters. That's why I don't blame necessarily politicians for doing it. I'm saying as a country, as a culture, we all have to decide, right and left, that we're not going to be bought off by false promises. And that goes for everybody, cross-generational and cross-party lines. Yeah. And that's the honest conversation that we just have not had with the American people, and it's everybody's fault.
Yeah, it's difficult to have that conversation because in many ways it's not a popular message. So I've tried to deliver in a couple of campaigns here locally. I wish you the best of luck in trying to deliver it on a national level. Folks, I can't believe the hour has already gotten by here. I want to mention a couple things in closing here. One, September 13th, you're going to say is your next youth conference. Is that right?
Yes, okay, it is. You'll see ads for that coming out soon.
All right. So all you
heard it people, here, Bill. It's on your show first.
Yeah, hey, we broke the news here. So all you young people, look, Dan's book, again, is Fortitude, American Resilience in an Era of Outrage. It's available on Amazon. I have downloaded in the process of reading it. I'll probably write a review about it at some point in my blog. Hope you guys will join us next week back here talking about animals. So all you animal lovers, come. We're going to talk about the problems with animals in Houston and, frankly, how it affects public health and a lot of other things inside the city of Houston. See you here next week, 2 o'clock next Saturday, KPRC Radio, AM 950 with more common sense talk radio.